Okay, we're diving into the letter of James today. For more on James, Mayhem series, all about James. Okay, you are more than welcome to start off by pausing and reading our 12 rules of reading biblical text. And if you don't like the 12 rules, well, this isn't the place for you. If you don't understand the 12 rules, go listen to the audiobook that is uploaded on this channel because there's time to go over it every time. It's our Bible study series that go pretty in depth. Warning, we're not language watching people. We're very salt of the earth, down to earth. It also does not follow the politically correct patterns of modern preachers and teachers. So if you're looking for that, also definitely not the place for you. I also do a lot of referring back to a book that I wrote and read aloud on this channel that sort of takes you through the entire arc. So if I refer back, chances are I'm referring back to things in that book that you haven't listened to. So if you're confused, try that. And we also did a video where we went, it's short, but we kind of went through our cast of characters here and how all of these modern figures play into the biblical narrative. And we did this so that things could sort of, stick in people's heads about who all of these people are and what their roles are. So if you're confused, go see that. On this particular video, the microphone really sucked because I had headphones on and I was listening to music, and I really don't want to go through and do the whole thing again. So you can hear it. It's just a little muffled and weird on the mic, so deal with it. Okay, we are doing, we're continuing tonight with the letter of James. So let's get into it. We're going to read, I don't know what our purpose is tonight. Let's take a look. In the second page of the letter of James. We're going to talk a little bit about first fruit and also a biblical view on this whole faith and works argument and what James teaches about that. All right, so let's jump right in. What do I want to do today? I have to do the mounts for you guys. I've got the mouse, whatever you call it. The Greek. I've got to do the Greek interlinear because there's some janky shit. No, I don't want to say that. No, I don't want to say that. That's too cynical. I want to say the English language doesn't capture the beauty and the depth of what James says sometimes. So we'll start here, and then perhaps I'll jump over. And just read you a little bit of the Greek version because it's absolutely beautiful. Okay, but starting off, we got kind of through here. So we're going to start in the English Standard Version anglicized. We're talking about how let no one say when he's tempted that I'm being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he's lured and enticed by his own desires. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And that's really where we honed in the last time. But let's continue off this next paragraph, and then we're going to do a quick stop. Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of light, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. Remember, we did a whole thing on instruction, warning, test, and how God doesn't change, which throws dispensationalism out the fucking door, but I digress. Of his own will, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. We're going to stop right here. We're going to stop right here. And we're going to jump over to the Greek. The first thing I want to do is talk about first fruits. Okay? And we're in James 1, verse 18. This one says, according to his sovereign plan, he brought us into being through his word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits of all he created. Many preachers like to generalize this verse, and Christians, they like to apply shit to themselves, and I question that. I really do. My favorite apostle, Paul, is he was writing letters to specific people, sitting in specific pews in specific churches at a specific time, right? And somehow we take 2 or 3 verses from there and then apply it to ourselves 2,000 years later. And it's like, you can't do that. It wasn't a general teaching. And, to Paul's credit, I give him a lot of shit. But to his benefit, I think that if he knew that people were going to take his personal letters that he was writing to people in these churches, his little cronies, and call them scripture and the inspired word of God and stick them in a book called the Bible, thousands of years, I think he would have shit himself. Like, I don't even think Paul would go for that, right? So I think we have to take a really different look at scripture and read it in the context and who they were speaking to, and then take those lessons and morals and apply those to ourselves. And I think that's a wiser version than us imagining that James is directly talking to us here. Okay, so that's kind of how I want to look at this. But Christians just pick out verses that they love, Christian preachers, and then they apply it to themselves directly today in 2024. And it doesn't always fit. So the first thing we need to do is what is this first fruits? What is that about? Well, first fruits was a time, and there's a festival and a harvest behind this. So this is a really big deal. Remember, we just touched on the threshing floor and the harvest time when we were in the book of Ruth, which is the first piece that we're going to look at in the Meet David series. So that whole thing's finished. Go to Ruth. And, we kind of talked about harvesting and the threshing floor part of this. But first fruits is sort of where people get the idea of tithing, or, bringing 1/10 of the crop to the priest or the preacher. They put that in Leviticus and Deuteronomy for you. See the Key series. That's an academic series I did for the Mideast. It's really short, and it kind of talks about how these things are put together. But at its basic, its most basic, beyond the holiday and the celebration and the priestly additions, first fruits is basically offering the first of your harvest to God and giving him your best, like the cream of the crop, if you will, offering that piece to God, and him finding that acceptable is going to then bless the entire harvest that comes after it. So this is the first little piece, right? And I think of first fruits when you're sitting in a really swanky dinner with a really handsome man, right? And the waiter comes over and he pours the wine and he just puts a little bit of wine, and the guy takes it and just takes that little sip to make sure it's okay. And then he sits down and takes the bottle, right? And then the rest of the bottle is poured into both glasses. That little taste of the wine before it's given to the table, right? And accepted as a whole, that first little piece, that little sip and smell of the wine and chicken the legs on the wine, all that. That's how you can kind of think of first fruit, right? So it's presenting the cream of the crop, the first piece to God, and finding it acceptable. He will bless the rest of the harvest and the rest of that harvest and growing season. So now that we know this, and there's a whole bunch of holidays and Old Testament stuff and priestly stuff that all gets hooked and linked to this traditional and spiritual idea of first fruits. But now let's read it again in the context of James, and then we're going to run over to the Greek a little bit. Because although I think that this version made decent choices as to what sentence 18 means. It's really moving to hear the whole word, like the whole definition of these words makes this part really come alive. And so I contend, most preachers are going to tell you that believers are the first fruits. So any believer, anybody just believes, anybody that believes are the first fruits. No, that's not what it says. James clearly says we, meaning we, Israel and the Hebrews, the Hebrews of Israel and the Jews of Jerusalem that are listening and following Jesus at this time, in this year, right now, in the present tense that he is writing to, his audience, his direct audience. Those are your first fruits. We are not first fruits 2,000 years later. We're 2,000 years harvesting later. So we would be the whole harvest, right? That is blessed and accepted because of the high quality of the first fruits. That's where we're going. So no, I'm sorry, guys. Preacher tells you, oh, you're the first fruits. All Christian believers are first fruits. No, you're not. You're 2,000 years later of harvest, okay? James and his audience that were directly following Jesus and his teachings in this time, they were the first fruits, okay? And according to his sovereign plan, he brought us into being through his words of truth so that we would be kind of first fruits of all his creation. So we, the ones that James is talking to, are the first fruits. They're the first to get that word of truth where God sent Jesus down. He sent the king to say, let me straighten this shit out. All right, so this whole first part, if you can see here, according to his sovereign plan, right? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words that they had to fit it into English with. But the word is just bulimai, or bulimai, and it's really beautiful. This word, all these 5 words, this Greek means he's decreeing, he's appointing. Okay, it pleases God. Okay, so he's disposed, he's pleased. It pleases him. In other words, he desires, he pleases. It makes him happy. That's the first part. Okay, it makes him happy to make this decree. According to God's pleasing decree said, that's what it is, that he brought. Well, up here it means forth. Down here it means brought. Okay, it brings forth or brings into being. Up here it brings forth death. Here it's bring forth into being. So what does it really mean? It really means to generate a spiritually generate. Okay, so back up here, when sin is full grown, it spiritually generates death. And down here, according to God's happiness and will, he spiritually generated us into being. So this is a spiritual birth, or a spiritual conception, if you will, right? A spiritual birth to bring forth. Through his word, that just means spoken word, vibration, uttered word from his speech, from his command, from his doctrine. Okay, the word of God. It's his expression, his discourse. So through his spoken word, right? Through the vibration of his word, through his uttering. So according to God's pleasure, okay, he generated spiritually through his vibration of truth, but not just truth. This is divine truth revealed to men. Let's go back. According to what pleases God, he decreed through his word of divine truth and generated into us a spiritual birth. So that we, the people sitting right here that I'm talking to, would be first fruits. They're the first portion of all. of his creatures. There you go, all of his children, all of his creation. It's really beautiful. So he's like, we're the foundation, guys. We're it. We're the first to hear that word of truth sent through Jesus to rebirth us. And we're the first fruits. We're the one that God's going to look at and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to bless the whole harvest because of what you're doing and following my son. So I think that's really a lot deeper than this says. The other thing this reminds me of immediately is jumping over to John 15, and we're just going to read this in the NIV because I don't care. Where he says, I'm the true vine. This is Jesus talking in John 15. I'm the vine and my father's the gardener. So this whole imagery of first fruits and harvesting and, the fruits on the vine, all that kind of stuff. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit. So he's saying Jesus is even getting pruned. God's pruning Jesus, his son. Oh, don't dare say that in church because they'll say, no, Jesus is perfect. Well, if he's perfect, why is he cutting off branches that bear no fruit? Jesus should always bear fruit. He's pruning Jesus. He's pruning the branches in me that bears no fruit. But every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it'll be even more fruitful. So who is in Jesus that isn't perfect, right? Who is in Jesus? Who are these branches? What are these branches that aren't perfection? Remain in me as I remain in you, because no branch can bear fruit by itself. You're already clean because of the work I've spoken to you. Remain in me as I remain in you, because no branch can bear fruit by itself. Who do you think the branches are? What do you think the branches are?
Well, I contend that, I don't know, a few billion Christians who think that they're lopping onto Jesus because they slapped his name onto a magical sperm, eternal logos, Hellenized Jewish Philo of Alexandria, Saul of Tarsus promoted Light in the Desert show, erasing his patriarchal bloodline to King David, who carries all of those covenants, all those people saying, Lord, Lord. He says, I never knew you. You were too busy chasing the light show, pagan Catholic Paul, right off a cliff. Well, maybe they're pruning that. Maybe that. Because if you're calling on the wrong Jesus, are you really in him to begin with? Are you just latching onto his name and it's got to cut you off? It's a narrow gate. And it's a narrow path leading to that narrow gate. I wouldn't think a few billion Christians following those Catholics and their magical Paul light show off a cliff, billions, doesn't sound very narrow to me.
Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. Here's why. I am the vine and you are the branches. So, back to this Christian doctrine. This is Jesus is perfect, and all you have to do is say Jesus, and you're perfect too because of Jesus. You're going to steal his righteousness and stand on Jesus's righteousness because Jesus is perfect. Well, if Jesus was perfect and all you had to do is say his name, God wouldn't have to prune you and cut you off. Okay? God wouldn't be cutting off branches. You are the branches that are getting cut off because you cannot stand in Jesus's righteousness. What do you need to do? You remain in me and I remain in you, and you'll bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that is thrown away and withers, and such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me, and my words remain in you, ask whatever you want, and it will be done. Preachers also like to leave that first part out of there. They like just to say, ask whatever you want. This is what he says. He says, remain in me, and my words remain in you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples or my students. So if you're going to be a student of mine, you better freaking act like it, dude. You have to represent. You got to represent. You don't run around dicking around. Okay? As the Father loved me, I have loved you. Remain in my love. How do we remain in your love, Jesus? By saying, Jesus, Jesus. No. We remain in his love because if you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. Just as I kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. It's not just about belief, is it? This isn't about believers. This is about obedience. And we've talked about this 1,000,000,000 times, right? All right. So this all reminds me of John 15. This talk about the first fruit and the branches and the gardening and all that kind of stuff. So anytime I talk about this harvesting and gardening, I think of the threshing floor and I think of the vine and the branches parable from Jesus, that teaching. All right. So we, the people of James's church, remember, because he's writing to who? Who is his audience? The 12 tribes in the dispersion. We talked about that. He's talking to Israel, who are dispersed among the nations, and he's talking to the Jewish believers in Jesus, who are around Jerusalem and abroad. Okay? And we know who Israel versus Jews, they're two different things. We did that in Revelation, go back there. So that's who he's talking to. Those are the first fruits. Okay, it's not the believers today. We are the rest of the harvest that are being accepted and pulled into the family because of the work of Jesus and the first fruits that followed him. The vine and the branches. Okay, this is first crop, if you will. The first crop from the branches of Jesus. Okay, Jesus is the vine. Followers are the branches. First fruits are the first crop, the first piece of that harvest to be brought home to God. And the rest of us, we're still out here sprouting off the branches 2,000 years later, right? So we're not the first fruits, we're the beautiful harvest that comes later. All right, understand this, my dear brothers. We can go back, I think, to this one. Know this, my beloved brothers. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. If anyone is a hearer, not a doer, he's like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. He looks at himself and goes away, and at once forgets what he's like. It's the one who looks into the perfect law, the law of freedom, law of liberty, and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts. He will be blessed in his doing. So he's saying is if you just go to church on Sunday and hear nice stuff, and then go out and act however you want, and you're not doing and implementing the things that you're learning, it's useless. Like, it is useless. And then people run around all the time. They're like, they'll learn a lesson and they'll be like, oh, I got it. Yeah, I totally agree. That helped me so much. And then they don't do anything. We talked about this so much about Hebrewing over, right? And in faith, stepping out and making a change. And if you're not Hebrewing over, you're still standing on the side of the river and you're not getting anywhere, right? You're just believing in shit and you're not getting anything done. He's saying that following the law, and the real law, not the law of the Pharisees, not the Jankified law, but God's true law that was clarified by Jesus. That law, okay? That's the law of freedom. And if you persevere in that, and you're not just listening to the pretty words, but you're actually implementing it into your life and acting upon that, that person is going to be blessed. Okay? You're not going to be blessed just because, you go to church on Sunday and say pretty things and listen to pretty things. That's what he's saying. I think that's really important. I think we've really lost that. If anyone thinks he is religious and does not bridle his tongue, but deceives his heart, this person's religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and keep oneself unstained the world. He's calling out the whole fucking world right here, okay? This word deceives, okay? It says if someone thinks he's religious, yet doesn't bridle his tongue, but it's not just his tongue, it's his language, it's his talk, right? It's his teachings, okay? It's his speech, okay? And deceives or moves into error the heart. So what it's saying is if you're using your speech to move your heart into error, people think bridling the tongue means don't say shit. Don't get mad and say, like, don't do that. That's not bridling your tongue. Or, wow, this is ridiculous. Or, fuck, I'm in traffic. Darn it. Like, shit. When you get something, you think that's bridling the tongue. Not necessarily. No, that's not what this means. Okay. When you take it in the Greek, what he's saying, he's calling out religious. Okay. If someone thinks that he is religious, if he presumes proper, if he presumes to be, if he presumes to be, if he presumes to be distinguished and, I mean, think of the Pharisees of the time, right? But he doesn't tame his speech and instead deceives his heart, brings his heart into error. This person's worship is worthless, groundless, okay, perverted, corrupt. Isn't it interesting that they don't put the words erroneous in principle, corrupt, and perverted? Where's that? They just go, oh, it's worthless. No, what he's saying is if someone thinks that they're above everyone else, right? But doesn't bridle their language and speaks things that are not true, leading and seducing hearts into error. This person's whole religious system is a fucking sham. It's a corrupted sham. So, Christians will take that, oh, you're not bridling your tongue, to mean like, shit. Oh, she doesn't bridle her tongue, she's not a Christian. That's not what this is saying. This is talking about the perversion of religion is done by speech. That's what he's saying. You're talking people into error, and the whole thing's worthless. The context here is religion. The context here is hearing the word, but not doing the word. You're just talking pretty things and you're not doing anything with your faith. Then you might as well not even believe you're worthless. It's absolutely worthless. Because true religious system that's undefiled, chaste, unsoiled before God or to God, the Father, is this. Okay? Look out, visit, go see orphans, okay? Bereaved, desolate, and widows in their time of trouble, their affliction, their distress, their distressing circumstances. And keep yourself unstained by the world, unblemished, spotless, pure. Don't be married to things of the world. Religion is things of the world. He's telling you, he's calling it out just like Jesus did. Jesus and James were brothers, guys. They're teaching the same thing. People use James wrong all the time on out of context. All right. My brothers, showing favoritism as you live out your faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. What are we doing with our faith? We're living out our faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. If a man comes into your congregation, it actually says in the synagogue, wearing a gold ring and fine clothes, and a poor man in dirty clothes also comes in. And you pay attention to the one wearing fine clothes and say, oh, sit here in a good place. But to the poor man, you say, stand over there, sit on here at my feet. Have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil motives? Okay, what this means is evil thoughts, evil reckoning, evil discourse. It means bad, ill, unsound, unfair judgments, It basically means you're making assumptions, right? You're making assumptions through your judgment. You're being judgmental of others. Okay. That automatically, because you're swanky, you're a better person. Listen, my dear brothers, didn't God chose those whom the world considers poor to be rich in faith and inherit the kingdom which he promised to those who love him? But you've dishonored the poor. You've dishonored the people that God chose. Remember, James's church was called the Ebion, or the poor. Is it not the rich who oppress you? This is tyrannize over and exploit. Okay, that word for express sort of means like exploit. You got to think of like a class system here. Okay, don't they exploit you? This is the rich, the opulent, the wealthy. Okay, the dignified, if you will. And are they not the ones who drag you into court? Tribunals. He's talking literal court. And remember, this is all going on at a time when James is answering and countering the letters of Paul and his teachings, although we're not reading it that way. And the court case is going on, trying to outlaw Christianity. It's all happening here, okay? Because of the problems at the temple that we learned back in Jesus Words Only series. If you want to see a little bit about how that all blew up in James' face, go see the 2 videos on the book of Luke that I just started. It's in the Jesus Words series, and we have 2 videos there that kind of explain all of this going to court that James didn't fucking need this headache about, but got this headache. So he's saying, aren't these people like the same assholes that are dragging you around and bringing you to court and persecuting you? Because remember, we've got that political structure with Rome and the priesthood and the politicians and the Herods and all this stuff's going on. So he's directly referring to that. Aren't these the ones who are blaspheming the honorable name by which you were called? If you really fulfill the royal law, okay, this is the perfect law, the highest excellence law. Why are you fulfilling the royal, regal law? Because you're obeying the king. I don't know which word to show you. The royal law. It's a kingdom. They're talking about the kingdom name. If you really fulfill the royal law as set forth in this writings, in the holy writings, you'll love your neighbor as yourself, and you're doing well. So if you're doing that, you're doing well. Okay? But if you show favoritism, you're committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. What he's doing is, we talked about this in the 10 Commandments, how you take those 10 Commandments and you fold them together, and they all meet and go down to the 5 principles, right? And the summarization is some of the law of the 10 Commandments is all about loving God and how to continuously self-improve to do that throughout your lifetime. And the other commandments are all about loving people and God's creation and how to continuously grow and improve throughout your lifetime and doing that. This is directly what James is talking about as the royal law. Loving your neighbor as yourself, you're doing well. But if you show favoritism, you're committing sin because you're not loving other people like yourself. You're showing partiality. Okay? And you're missing the mark. And you're going to be convicted by the law as transgressors. So you're going to be a lawbreaker. Okay? Whoever keeps the entire law but fails at a single point is guilty of the law as a whole. People love to use this against James and say that he was teaching Jewish law and that you have to follow all 613 of the Pharisaical laws. I wholeheartedly disagree. Okay? That is not what he was teaching to people in the dispersion. And I've shown that a few times in Acts and different places. But that's not what was happening here. Okay? He's saying, remember, we did this in 10 Commandments, right? Loving God, loving people. Well, if you do a single thing that doesn't love people and love God's creation, you're breaking the law. And if you do things that are against God and don't love God, you're breaking the law. So, like, you can't just pick and choose. You got to love people and you got to love God. That's what he's saying. Because he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, don't commit murder. Like, that's loving people. And according to our 5 principles, let's go together with other things with loving God. Now, if you don't commit adultery, but you do commit murder, you're a transgressor, you're still breaking the law. Like, you can't pick one and not the other. right? They go, well, at least I didn't cheat on him when I killed him. Like, that doesn't make sense. What are you saying? Like, don't be stupid. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law that brings freedom. Okay? For judgment will be without mercy. For one who has shown no mercy, mercy triumphs over judgment. I want to talk about that. There is the James book. I call it the Book of James. It's not referring to this one, but in the pseudo writings, the commentings, when in between his letters with James and Peter, and in the Didache and all these other places where they're quoting and pulling things from James that didn't make it into the Bible, there is the Lord's Prayer, and it's written in the Dead Sea Scrolls and those documents a little bit different than you see here in the Bible. And one line that really stuck with me when I read it, it's just changed in a couple little words. In one of them is, when he says God doesn't tempt you, and the part in the Lord's Prayer that says, lead us not into temptation. Well, God can't lead you into temptation according to James. So in the original, or I can't say original, in the other versions and other historical documents that we have that were written by James, it says, leave us not in temptation, meaning God deliver us from temptation. That's the prayer. Not lead us not into temptation, but leave us not in temptation. And I think that fits a whole lot better with what James says. The other one is this one. When it says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Okay? So forgive us like we forgive others. No. It's a little bit switched. What the other versions say, written by James in these other documents, that line in the Lord's Prayer actually says, let me get it right. God, Lord, as you forgive others, like in his perfect way, like your mercy, your forgiveness, your abundance of forgiveness, forgive others as you forgive others, so may we forgive others. Meaning, help us to model our behavior after you. As you forgive, so may we forgive. Right? Like, teach us how to forgive like you do. Teach us how to have mercy like you do. As you do it, so we do it. So we want to do it. So we strive to do it. Help us to do that. And so the prayer is worded just a little bit differently in the other places and that. And I think that that's really is in line with this line right here. It reminds me of that every time I read this. For judgment without mercy. Who has shown no mercy, mercy triumphs over judgment. What good is it, my brothers, if someone claims to have faith but has no works? Like, you're just standing on the side of the river believing in shit, you're not crossing over. Remember we talked about this one? Can that kind of faith save them? No, because you're not leaving. You're still standing on the other side of the river. If a brother or sister lacks adequate clothing and is in need of daily food, and one of you says to them, oh, go in peace, stay warm, eat your fill, but you don't give them what their body needs, what good is that? Like, what the fuck help are you? Peace out, man. Just love. But you're not giving them a piece of bread and they're starving. Not gonna help. Okay. In the same way, faith that works is dead. Since it's by itself. Like, it's alone. It's not doing anything. It's just not doing anything. What did you fucking do? You're not loving other people by having faith. You're not loving God by having faith. You're just loving yourself because you think you found a clause to get into heaven free. Like, you're going to get your ticket in, but fuck everybody else. It's not going to work that way. That's not the kingdom. That's not the law of the kingdom. Okay? Well, I believe, so I'm good, but fuck that hungry guy over there. He can starve. James is like, what good is it? Like, you're not representing, dude. Represent, homies. Right? And then he goes, this is an interesting line that people love to take out of context. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. What this but actually means is, on the other hand, right? Some people will say, well, you have faith and I have works. He's kind of digging on the Pharisees for this one, right? And he says, well, show me your faith without works and I'll show you my faith by my works. So he's kind of going after both ends of the paradigm, just like his brother did. He says, you can't have works without faith. And you can't have faith without works. Neither one is okay. We're not going with the, oh, hippy dippy, just say Jesus crap because you're worthless. And then you're not representing the kingdom. Like, that's not how it works in the kingdom. It's not every man for himself, just believe shit in your head and don't move over, don't Hebrew over. That's so foreign to Hebrew thought, he wouldn't even have thought of that, except to counter Saul of Tarsus up there doing his Greek shit. But the other one he's attacking is people who are just going down a checklist and be like, yep, did that, we're good. He said, that's not going to help you either. Because on the other hand, if someone says, well, you have faith that I have works, let me show you my works. And he's like, no. They work together in cooperation. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you my faith by my works. Okay? You believe God's one? Great. You do well. But even the demons believe and shudder. It's not about what you believe. It's about who you serve, who you represent, and the acts that you do because of that belief. Okay? What's interesting to me is this word works. And I want to click on that and have you take a look at this. Okay, because we're like, works. It's a deed. It's an action. Okay, it's an office, a charge, a business. It's a course of action. It's to bring things into effect. All right. Obeying your king and keeping the commandments is not works. This is something that Pollyanity gets very confused with. They think that if you do anything, like obeying the 10 Commandments and obeying the king of the kingdom, who is Jesus Christ, if you obey him, that's not okay. You're erasing what he did on the cross. All that bullshit doctrine drives me bananas. Because obedience to a king is not a good work. It's a requirement. I can't live in Saudi Arabia very long if I'm not obeying the king. If I start disobeying the king all over the fucking place, how long am I going to be in the kingdom? Not long. They're going to throw my ass out. It's a kingdom and it requires obedience. Obeying Jesus is not an option. It's a requirement. It's a command. That's what it is. Works are official charges, duties, business, representing. I'm here about God's business. I'm about God's business. I'm doing an action. I'm doing a process. I'm Hebrewing over. I'm stepping out of faith and I'm doing something. Substance in effect. I'm having an effect from my faith. I'm Hebrewing over here. See Revelation, first half hour about that one. He's like, the demons believe, but they're not doing shit. They're doing the wrong shit. So if you believe, but you're doing all the wrong shit, you're not living by the kingdom rules and you're going to get your ass thrown out. Okay? Just saying. Would you like to be shown, you shallow person? I don't like the word shallow. This is empty, having nothing, unfulfilled, fruitless, void, in vain, no purpose, hollow, fallacious, false, and inconsiderate. That's a whole lot more damning than shallow. Okay? Would you like me to prove it to you, you shallow person? So I like to click on the Greek word sometimes. It gives you such a fuller meaning. Okay? Would you like to ascertain, acknowledge, be assured to be a master, you empty, no purpose schmuck? Okay? That faith without works is useless. Not only is it useless, it's unprofitable, hollow, inactive, idle, averse, injurious. Was not Abraham, our father, justified? Our father being the seed, like generationally, justified by works when he offered his son Isaac to the altar? You see, that faith was at work along with his works, and his faith was made complete by his works. He didn't just believe, he did something in obedience. Okay? I love this word. His faith was along with his works. That means in cooperation. The word is, where's the word? Synergeos, in synergy with, okay? To working together to achieve a result. They're in synergy. They're commingling. They're cooperating together. Okay? So faith is synergistic with your works. And his faith was made complete by his works. Scripture was fulfilled that says that Abraham believed, there's that, ooh, Abraham believed God, right? There's that EUO. We talked about this in the Greek lesson. and it was credited to him as righteousness. This is that obedience word for belief. Okay? And he was called the friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. So you can't just believe shit, keep standing on the other side of the river. In the same way, was also not Rahab the harlot, just prostitute. Okay. Rahab the harlot, justified by works, when she took in the spies. She received the spies as a guest, okay, and then sent them out like other way. So she's like, go that way instead of that way. It's a great story. We haven't gotten to the harlot Rahab yet. For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also is faith devoid of works is dead, without life. And here he uses the word pneuma for spirit, the breath of God, right? Just as the body without the breath of God is dead, so also is your faith without the presence of works. It's dead. It's like useless. Death and misery. It's fatal. Not only is it fatal, but it has destructive power. No longer devoted, no longer under the influence of, dead in respect of fruitfulness, morally or spiritually dead, dead in alienation from God. Wouldn't that be a much better way to translate this? To say the body without the Spirit of God is dead. So also is faith, devoid of works, is dead in alienation from God. It's way more powerful. This is why I recommend pulling this up every once in a while in the Greek and reading it that way, and just clicking on words and looking at the whole long list of choices that they had, right? So I'm not saying that they did a bad job, as I usually say, but just clicking on this word dead right here. Look at all of these choices. We have without life, dead to a thing, no longer devoted to, no longer under the influence of God, dead in respect of fruitlessness. There's the vine and the branches, right? Morally or spiritually dead, dead in alienation from God, subject to death, mortal, causing death and misery, fatal, and having destructive power. So if you're not doing good shit and crossing over and Hebrew over, what's the difference between you and a demon? Because demons believe, and they're scared. They shudder from fear. So there's James, and there's his take on faith and works. All right, let's jump back over here and see if I get everything. Let's share this one instead. So you've gone ahead and read James. I want you to two takeaways are the first fruits, and who actually are those first fruits. Those are your very first Christians, right? That brought forth the first fruits of the vine of Jesus. And then God bless the whole harvest so that we can tag along. And people kind of think that James is, really lawful and for the Jews and all about the law. But when you really understand how his quotes are taken out of context, and you see the whole context, and you look at it in the ancient languages and compare James' teachings to the teachings of Jesus, his brother, you see that they're really actually really, really very aligned. James gets a bad rap, but when you're pulling these things out of context, they don't like it. And the reason they don't like it is because, he is teaching sound Jesus doctrine. And in Pollyanity, not all, but, not all churches, but, well, yeah, all churches, I'm sorry. When they're teaching Pollyanity, they have to get rid of the teachings of Jesus to embrace the teachings of Paul. Dispensationalism does that particularly, where Jesus is over now. And, one thing you'll hear from Christians is, well, Paul is after Jesus resurrected. So after Jesus went to God and is sitting in heaven with God, then this is what we listen to. We don't actually have to listen to the stuff that Jesus taught while he was walking around. That was for those apostles, those simpletons in the desert. Now that Jesus is up with God, now we listen to Paul, because that's the new thing. After resurrection, we're going to listen to that part. And so they have to get rid of everything before Jesus's resurrection in order to justify following Paul. But that breaks down really quickly when you start to understand James and Jude, Jesus's brothers, who are speaking after Jesus went to heaven, right? So, like, James is right there running the church as the leader of the church and the most influential figure of the time, right after Jesus's death and resurrection. So, in order to accept this janky ass Pollyanity doctrine of the church that the church established, you gotta slander and get rid of James, because James comes back after the resurrection, after the letters of Paul were written historically on the timeline. James is answering Paul, so Paul is written first. So churches can no longer take the letters of Paul and claim that it's the new deal, that Jesus taught something else now. So they've either, and that's a hard push, and they don't want to do that. So they push James aside and they slander him, and they make him sound a lot more harsh. And James is for the Jews, and you get all this janky shit that you hear about James and Jude too. But in reality, when you really take it in context and look at his quotes and what he's saying and the balance of James, right? It's the same balance that King Jesus taught. He's just teaching the rules of the kingdom to his church that's being horribly persecuted and dragged into court by the Herods and the emperors and all this kind of stuff, with all the janky shit that was going on in Acts, which we handled in the Jesus Word series. So let's put James back into context and let's see what we can learn from him today. And I hope that was fulfilling for you, that you learned something, that James isn't so bad. And, whether preachers want to take Paul out of context and make their own Paul doctrine, or if it's what Paul really taught, it was at odds with the first apostles. And they prefer Paul's doctrine. So you got to really slander and get rid of James. So when you read him, he's actually really edifying. He makes a lot of sense. He mirrors the Old Testament teachings. He mirrors the teachings of his brother Jesus. And he's really encouraging and lovely. You just can't take him out of context and use his quotes back. All right. Bye. That's James and Christianity right there, guys. And I'll see you next time. Next time we're going to talk about the tongue, cursing and swearing. Just going to talk about bridling that tongue. We'll get a little deeper into that the next time.